Okay, here's my thought for the day. I often have people contact me and say, what do you think of this preacher? And what do you think of that preacher? And blah, blah, blah. And I don't really spend a whole lot of time listening to other preachers. I mean, I go to church on Sunday and we have a Bible study once a week. And then I spend most of my time talking to people in public, doing evangelism and that sort of thing, and reading books. Now, I don't read a whole lot of books that are published recently. I like to read old books. And the reason for that is, everybody has a different idea, and they get their ideas often from some strain of tradition. And depending on what your background is, if your background is Catholic or your background is Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness or some Eastern mysticism, you approach things with a certain bias. And we all do. I like to go back before all the bias, before all the traditions have leaked into biblical interpretation. And, basically, if you can get back to the early disciples of the apostles and read their material, you'll have a better understanding of really what the early church believed. I mean, we can read the letters of Paul and Peter and whatnot, and for the most part, they're pretty straightforward. They're pretty simple to understand if you read them in context. But oftentimes people don't read it in context. They cherry pick Bible verses because they have an agenda. Like if you're talking about the end times, about when Christ is going to return, they approach that with an agenda, with a preconceived idea. And they'll read what's going on in the news, they'll watch what's going on television, and based on what's going on in the world, what's going on in Israel, they'll cherry pick Bible verses to fit whatever's going on in the news. Well, let's go back to 70 AD. Let's even go back before that. Remember in Matthew 24, Jesus is having a discussion with his disciples, and they're asking him, okay, what's going to be the sign of your return and all this business? And he says, well, to start with, this temple that you guys are so excited about, there's not going to be one stone left upon another. And of course, they were a little bit shocked because he's telling them it's going to be destroyed, okay? And then later, when Paul writes to the Thessalonians, there was a bunch of people that were concerned that Jesus had already returned, or maybe that the rapture had occurred, or whatever your view is on that. But they were freaked out, and Paul was trying to give them some encouragement. And he gave a list of things that had to happen. Okay, and he said that the Antichrist would basically show up. And so then let's say fast forward another 50 years, or maybe another 100 years. Temple was destroyed in 70 AD. And then fast forward about maybe 50 years or so after that, and there was this guy by the name of Irenaeus. Irenaeus wrote a lot, and his main goal was to confront the heresies of his day. And he was commissioned and ordained by a guy named Polycarp. Polycarp was a guy who was a disciple of John the Apostle. So these are guys that have a pretty close to the source information. So listen to this. This is Irenaeus talking about the Antichrist, okay? But when this Antichrist shall have devastated all things in the world, he will reign for 3 years and 6 months and sit in the temple in Jerusalem. Then the Lord will come from heaven in the clouds in the glory of the Father, sending this man and those who follow him into the lake of fire. Okay, keep in mind the temple did not exist when Irenaeus was writing this. It was destroyed some 50 some odd years before he wrote this. Okay, so obviously then Irenaeus is has the understanding that there will be a temple in Jerusalem. I mean, how can the Antichrist rise up in the temple unless there is one, right? Well, there isn't one right now, but you still hear people say, oh, the return of Christ is right around the corner. Well, what does it mean? Right around the corner, or he's coming soon. I mean, you can read verses in the Bible where it talks about Christ coming soon, and it didn't happen for hundreds of years. You can see verses in the Old Testament that made these type of predictions. And then even the predictions about the destruction of the temple. When those guys were having that discussion in Matthew 24, it didn't happen, for decades later. And so what happens often when things don't happen right away, we tend to adjust our prophecy notes. And that's what happened with the Church of Rome. The Roman Church started out on the right track. Paul wrote a letter to the Romans, right? And then fast forward a few hundred years, Council of Nicaea, the Council of Ephesus, where Mary became the Queen of Heaven and all this business. And then Augustine shows up in around 4th century or so. And Augustine was he was a big writer. He was one of the top dogs of the clerics of his day. And they apparently began to run out of faith that there would be a temple in Jerusalem. And so therefore they adapted the idea that the church had become Israel. And it's kind of amazing how they can do that, because there's so many Bible verses that refute that idea. But, we are, as Christians, we're grafted into the natural branch. And Paul warns us about thinking that we are something that we're not, that we have to keep in mind that we're grafted in and we could be cut off. And so the whole idea that Paul is expressing is that, don't get so haughty to think that God has done away with the Jews. Now, there's obviously a partial blinding that has come over the Jews. However, God still has a promise for that piece of real estate. He doesn't just make a promise and then change his mind. So anyway, that was Irenaeus' thought that the Antichrist is going to appear in a temple in Jerusalem. So if you start seeing a temple being built, then we need to be getting concerned. I mean, there's been all kinds of people that have said, this person and that person was the Antichrist. Well, they may have been an Antichrist because, like John wrote in one of his epistles, even now there are many Antichrists among us. And even as I'm making this video, there are many Antichrists among us. There are various religions that the whole nature of them is Antichrist. But that doesn't mean they are the Antichrist. There is going to be a guy that's going to be a counterfeit Messiah that eventually the whole world is going to think he's the man. But and they're going to get sucked into it. And now that we have such technology that this type of idea can be promoted worldwide on computers and various forms of technology with AI. And with AI, they make videos now that look so close to the real thing that unless you know something about videos and cameras and production, you can very easily be hoodwinked to think that these are legit. I mean, you see pictures of people, you see videos of people having polar bears as pets and these sort of things. These are AI videos and they're really cute and all. But I tell you what, a polar bear is not going to be your pet. You're going to be his lunch. And when people make these kind of videos, it just goes to show how ignorant they are of real life.